All right, we're back here on the Chase Thomas podcast, the Wednesday, August 10th, 2022 edition here on the podcast. TrillBroDude is here. The man, TrillBroDude. I just love saying that because I'm like, oh, who's in the pod? It's like TrillBroDude. And they're like, what are you talking about? And it's like TrillBroDude. And I tell my fiance, it's a TrillBroDude. And she's like, what? That's not a real person. It's like, no, it's a real person.
Rolls off the tongue.
Yes. How are you doing, sir?
Doing well. We are past the busy part of the off season. We're kind of just clinging to whatever Kevin Durant drama that rolls around every few days. And I've been, cutting back a little bit. I was deep in the slop in the off season. The first month I was streaming multiple times a week, doing multiple podcasts. I've cut back a little bit, but now I'm able to relax and enjoy and really just, get ready for the next season.
Well, I'm curious now that you know, and it's very much apparent that what happened with James Harden and the Sixers and the contract negotiations and everything that happened there was at the very least unbelievably unethical. TrillBroDude, how do you live with your team building strategy in Philadelphia and the way that you guys went to get Daniel House and then PJ Tucker, the means through which you try and win a championship? How dare you, sir?
Well, I do think it's a little bit of karma for the league overthrowing Sam Hinkie and giving us Brian Colangelo and Jerry Colangelo and that disaster of those few years that pretty much messed up the window that we have now. And between the Colangelo front office and the one after that, just blew all of the assets that Hinkie had built up. So it's a little bit of karma that we're able to kind of stick it back to the league in that way. The other way around it is I look at it like this, obviously they were tampering or whatever. The PJ Tucker stuff came out allegedly tampering. They were clearly, there were things going on behind the scenes, but I said it like this. I definitely think that they'll probably get fined. They'll probably lose a second round pick or whatever. The only thing that differs from your usual tampering thing here is if they find out that there was a handshake deal for Harden to get max money next year. Because that would be, there's no precedent for that really. It happens, but there's really no precedent for a max player to have a handshake behind the scenes to say, hey, we'll take care of you in a year from now if you just take a pay cut this year so we can have a little bit. It's salary cap vision, really. It's not like this kind of stuff. Generally, I don't think that anyone's lost a first round pick since the Timberwolves with the Joe Smith thing. I don't know if you remember that. That was 20 years ago at this point.
The last Joe Smith thing I remember is Twitter trying to figure out whether or not Joe Smith on Twitter was actually Joe Smith on Twitter.
Oh, no.
Do you remember that?
I don't know.
He was a verified, I don't know if that's still a thing, but a couple years ago, people were trying to figure out if Joe Smith on Twitter, because I think he was tweeting some takes and stuff like that, and they're like, this can't be Joe Smith. And it was a whole thing of trying to figure out if the verified Joe Smith Twitter account was actually Joe Smith or not. I never got a full answer on that one, I don't think.
It was back in the day when people used to 10, 15 years ago when people would just be Facebook fan pages and they just I was watching a Beef History. I don't know if you've ever watched that, but they did the Deshaun Stevenson who had the beef with LeBron James. The other Stevenson that had a beef with LeBron.
This is Mavs Heat, correct?
Yes, Mavs Heat. And there was someone that just had a Facebook page that was not him at all. And they just came out and they were talking all crazy stuff about LeBron on his Facebook page. And he had to come out and be like, that's not me. That's just a fan that has 10,000 followers on Facebook and pretends to be me. But yeah, no.
That's wild.
Yeah.
Different time, man. There was a different time there. Well, so how does that affect what the Sixers do next summer? Can they not, do they have to change the way they go about the contract negotiations with Harden? Or is it just we dare you to come after us? Because how are you going to prove this? There's no paper trail. There's no handshake. How are you going to prove any of this?
You would hope that they didn't put anything in writing and it was just kind of a wink deal like that from the Sixers perspective, obviously. Next year we weren't going to have salary cap space anyway. Joel Embiid's new contract kicks in. He's going to make $50 million. This was the last time that we would even really have a clean route to getting the mid-level exception and the biannual exception, which is what we use to sign PJ Tucker and Daniel House. So this was really the last time until probably 2025 that we could have a clear route to like getting actual space to sign guys. Next year, Tobias Harris is going to be on the last year of his deal. He makes a ton of money. James Harden will come back, hopefully. I mean, he'll either opt into his deal next year or, as everyone expects, he'll probably re-sign. So next year, the space wasn't really attainable. So they've kind of viewed this year as like the last year to get two more, clearly, role players that would fit around Joel Embiid, James Harden, and Tyrese Maxey. And then next year, the hope is that they can move off of Tobias Harris's expiring contract and maybe attach a pick or attach a young player and a pick and get back multiple role players on smaller contracts. So I think they looked at this year as like, we'll use the exceptions while we can. Next year, we'll trade Tobias Harris and his money and get a few smaller contracts that might be tradable and also just might be a little bit better of a fit around the core guys that we have. And then from there, in a few years, eventually, this is very down the line, Tyrese Maxey will need to be extended. And at the same time, the Sixers could potentially get cap space and have another run if James Harden ages out or whatever happens. And they'll have a lot of flexibility in a few years from now.
Well, I'm just concerned where the money is, what kind of money they have left to bring back Gerald Green, Isaiah Cannon. I'm trying to think of some other Rockets from that time period where they're trying to recreate a new
Gordon,
version of the.
I mean, yeah, that was
Tobias Harris for Eric Gordon.
Yeah, well, we would have to at this point because we're hard capped, so we can't take on Eric Gordon's salary without sending out a ton of salary. So yeah, it would have to be something like that. I personally think they're probably done making any major moves. I think that any move that would happen now is if the Jazz decide to blow it up, and they already kind of started that with the Rudy Gobert trade, obviously. But if the Jazz decide to move on from Donovan Mitchell this offseason, and then they have a bunch of role players like Patrick Beverley and Bojan Bogdanovic and guys that would fit on the Sixers, then in that case, I think that would probably be the only time where maybe you're moving some smaller salaries. Matisse Thybulle, Furkan Korkmaz.
Pat Bev and Joel Embiid on the same team is just a lot for a playoff series. That's a lot.
We're just trying to get dogs. We're trying to be. We had no dogs last year. We're trying to get. We got PJ Tucker. It's a good start. Daniel House is a dog. We have a litter of puppies now. We have a few dogs, but we need to get to the point where we got a whole pound. And right now, I've been pounding the table to get Patrick Beverley. A lot of people are against the idea of signing.
Well, you acquired D'Anthony Melton. Like, what's the point of D'Anthony Melton if you're going after Pat Bev at this point?
So my whole thing has been is that the Sixers still, even though they have PJ Tucker, Tobias Harris, Daniel House, like their wing depth is still like shaky compared to like the top elite teams, right? So like the Celtics have great wings, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, the Bucks have Giannis and Chris Middleton. Giannis can be a wing or a big, whatever you want him to be. So my whole thing has been like, instead of trying to go get wings, like really good wings who never become available. For example, a guy like OG Anunoby, the price tag on him this offseason, he did not get traded, but the price tag was going to be the 7th pick, Josh Hart, a future first, and another rotation player. Like, you can't get those guys in trades. So you might as well just try to get as many guards that have long wingspans, that can defend, that can shoot, that can dribble, that can do the things that Melton can do and Pat Bev can do, but they also can guard up. Like, a lot of people don't talk about it, but like Patrick Beverley can guard 1 through 3 pretty comfortably, even though he's a smaller guard, and Melton can too. So I do think that if you're going to put your resources into acquiring more players, it's fine to have maybe one too many guards, as long as they're like a guard wing, like a G wing, basically, like a guard that can like pretend to be a wing. So that was the thought behind getting Patrick Beverley, because right now I think that like the Sixers have one of the best guard rotations in the NBA between Harden, Maxey, and Melton. And then if you have Patrick Beverley as like your fourth guard who can play 1, 2, and a little bit of 3, and same with Melton, then I think you just have a little bit more versatility and you have a little bit more just like guys that can play in the playoffs. And what the Sixers have really lacked, and some of it is Joel Embiid getting injured. Some of it is just the team not being good enough with high-end talent. Another part of that is that they haven't had rotation players. I mean, you're a Hawks fan. You watch, like, we had old-ass George Hill out there and Furkan Korkmaz and guys who, like, they're fine rotation players during the regular season coming off your bench, but like if they're playing in the playoffs, you're probably screwed. And this year we had the same problem. So I just think acquiring as many good defensive guys that can play guard and maybe play up a little bit and play wing isn't the worst thing in the world when you're preparing for the playoffs.
Now you have me thinking about DeJounte Murray versus Joel Embiid next year, like in a playoff series. DeJounte Murray just out here ruining rookies, ruining their lives.
I think
that
Paul
man does not
right.
care.
Yeah, he'll be all right. I think he was the best player from this past draft. So,
ooh, okay, I think it's a possibility. But
he went 1. I mean, I was pounding the table for him going 1 for months. The Jabari Smith thing never made any sense to me.
We'll see. I don't know. I just everything. It's so funny to me, like the draft stuff where people. It just, you go through it and people every year, it's like, oh, well, like everyone in the top 4 did well. Like they did great. And it's like, well, at least 2 of these guys are not working out and will be on team number 2. Like that's not how this works. So it's
at least like in the context of what you expect from a top 4 pick.
Yes.
Like Andrew Wiggins is not a number of your average number 1 overall pick, but 6 or 7 years into his career, he figured it out and became a very good player.
Look at the rest of that draft. What year was that?
2014.
2014. Okay, we're going to pull this up real quick.
Jokic, Marcus Smart. The top. I can tell you the top 4 right now.
Jabari was 2. Jabari's
Parker.
Out of the league, basically. You got Aaron Gordon, definitely not a number 4 overall. Dante Exum, I mean, bouncing around, hanging on for dear life. Marcus Smart, not a number 6 overall guy.
Well, I don't know. If you think about the average number 6 pick, I think Marcus Smart is about around that. And also, like, just won Defensive Player of the Year, very core piece on a very, very good team. You could argue he's as good as their 3rd best player. He's probably their 4th best player. Like, I think that the top, your high end top 6 pick in the draft, yeah, he's not that, but he's about probably a little bit above average even for that pick. I would say once you get out of the top 3 or 4, like it's really just like a crapshoot.
That's fair. And when you go back to this is a pretty good draft overall. It's not a bad draft overall.
Zach LaVine was a little bit later in the lottery. You had Julius Randle was top 10, I believe.
It's not bad.
Saric, that was an okay. The second
Clint
round
Capella
of that
went
draft,
late.
The second round of that draft is like
late.
one of the greatest ever. Yeah, it was like Spencer
Jeremy
Dinwiddie,
Grant.
Jokic, Jeremy Grant. Yeah, there was a lot of
Dwight Powell,
really...
Jordan Clarkson. Yeah, a lot of dudes in the second round.
Yeah.
Samaje Christian was a really good player at Xavier, but did not work out in the league. But when you look at actual fit though, in terms of House and Tucker, TrillBroDude, how do they actually fit? Do you like a closing lineup with PJ Tucker and the current roster? Does he fit? Are you worried about spacing at all with where PJ Tucker fits? Was he a missing piece when you look at this roster? How does that affect the guys who are already in the building from last year?
Well, I just look at it like, who is he replacing, right? Because as much as I love Danny Green, and as important as Danny Green really was for the Sixers this last 2 years, like, I think people tend to think of the Lakers when the fans all hated him and all of that stuff. But, like, Danny was older, and he wasn't moving quite like he did when he was on the Spurs or the Raptors even. But he was still a very good help defender, hit a ton of corner threes for us, was a good relocator. Like, and just because the Sixers wing depth has been so bad, was an incredibly important player. Like, both years in the playoffs that he played for us, he got hurt. And when he was out, we were just screwed. Like, we just didn't even have like another replacement level starting forward, small forward that we could plug in there. And with PJ, I look at it like, as good as Danny was, I definitely think if PJ plays the way he did in Miami, he's definitely an upgrade over Danny. Defensively, he's very good on the ball, off the ball. He's going to help a lot on that end. He's a much, much better rebounder than Danny Green, which is something that we've really, really needed on this team, especially after the Harden trade. We just need as many positive, good rebounders on the court to kind of extend possessions, get us second chances, get us out running. We just absolutely did not have that. And if you watch the Heat series, a lot of those, so early in the series and late in the series, outside of the first two games when Joel Embiid came back, the Sixers were getting absolutely dominated on the glass, and the Heat were just hustling their asses off. And that's what the Heat do. And they kind of put the Sixers in a position to expose their weaknesses on the glass. And I think PJ will definitely help in that regard. It's crazy to say because he's 37 years old, but PJ can still guard some of the best players in the NBA. He's incredibly good moving his feet in space. I mean, he was getting switched onto Trey in the Hawk series and held his own.
We don't have to talk about that series.
Yeah. But I mean, it's just good to have positive defenders that can do that are versatile, can switch, can play in multiple schemes. He's going to fight over screens. He's a very, very good defender still. And offensively, actually, weirdly enough, at 36 years old, just had the best year of his career offensively with the Heat, was back to hitting threes again, was able to do a little bit of passing off of the short roll, was able to, he added a floater and finger roll to his game. It didn't really make any sense to me that it took this long to figure this stuff out, but I definitely think PJ will be an upgrade. The only thing I worry about is just his age. Does he age out in the next 2 years? And is it the Danny Green experience again, where you get a good, useful player, but maybe past this physical prime, and because of that, they're not quite as effective when you get deeper into the playoffs.
It's interesting, too, when you talk about the boards, and there was so much made about that series Doc was obviously frustrated about the Paul Reed questions and stuff like that. And the thing I always went back to with that, where I was like, they don't have, I don't know if this was shared by a lot of Sixer fans, but I looked at it from the outside looking in, where I'm like, Doc's screwed either way. He knows that, it doesn't matter who gets those minutes. Not having Joel Embiid is what ultimately matters here. And it doesn't matter if he picks DeAndre Jordan or he picks Paul Reed. It does not matter. Y'all are looking at this thing. He looks at it as it doesn't really matter. We're screwed without Joel Embiid in that moment. And him being out, does not matter where we go here. When Joel Embiid goes down, that's it.
Well, that's kind of what I have been saying. But at the same time, the Sixers always have had this, Sixers fans, Sixers media, the NBA media has this idea that the Sixers have a backup center problem.
Yeah.
They just have a best player on the bench problem when Joel Embiid is not on the court. It's the same thing that you guys experience with Trey when he goes to the bench. Everyone's like, oh, the Hawks offense falls off a cliff because they don't have a backup point guard. And I'm like, well, Trey Young's a top 5 offensive player in the NBA. When you put him on the bench, your offense is going to be significantly worse. That's just kind of how these things work. And with Joel, it's the same thing. But the major difference, and the thing that was really frustrating for Sixers fans, was the fact that, one, none of us ever wanted to sign DeAndre Jordan. DeAndre Jordan, if you have watched him the past 3 years, is, for my opinion, the worst veteran player in the NBA. And that's not an exaggeration. He cannot do anything.
Good vibes guy, though. Stars love him.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, he's good. He's a good locker room guy, whatever.
He should be in the Udonis Haslem role. Why are we not doing that everywhere?
Honestly, that's what I'm thinking. The Nuggets hopefully brought him in for their fans' sake, because he just cannot play anymore. And we knew the second we signed him, I was working a shift that night, and my coworkers were like, why do you care so much about this veteran minimum guy getting it's not a big deal. And I was like, no, it is a big deal, because Doc is our coach, and Doc loves veterans, and Doc will never, ever, ever give up on one of his guys, ever. It doesn't matter. He could be the worst player in the NBA, which he was when he was on the Sixers, and we absolutely bled points anytime he played, and he would still get an opportunity over one of the younger guys. So our biggest frustration wasn't that and Morey's definitely to be blamed for that as well. I mean, Morey could have said, no, we're not signing him, even though he's friends with Doc and all that stuff. There's that element of it. And then we also had Paul Millsap, who's super old and washed, was a very good player at one point. But both of them are just way past their physical primes, to the point where they're unplayable. He couldn't do anything remotely positive on an NBA court. And because of that, we were like, why don't you just give Paul Reed the backup minutes, see how he is, and then by the time the playoffs come around, you're not scrambling like you did last year in the playoffs, where you're putting out 11 guys in a game 7 against the Hawks because you never figured out your rotation in the regular season. And he didn't do that, and then he threw Paul Reed into the fire in the Raptors series, and Paul is good enough and talented enough that he survived and like was actually good in that series and was actually pretty good in the Heat series too, other than the fouling problems. But like our biggest thing was like Reed and Bassey, the other backup center we have, like they should have gotten an opportunity. We should not have 5 centers on the roster and you're playing clearly the 2 worst players because they're older and you trust them or whatever. So that was our biggest frustration. It wasn't even necessarily like if we didn't have Joel, we had to get crazy 3-point luck or have Harden or Maxey go off or have something crazy happen for us to win one of those games in Miami. But having Doc as your coach, like you're just never going to get those young guys getting developed and being ready by the time the playoffs come around. And he's going to just throw them into the fire last second. And usually that doesn't work out.
Shout out to Doc, though.
Oh, I didn't even realize he's right behind you. Nice.
Hawks, I brought him in just for you. Yeah.
Did he make the All-Star team on the Hawks, or was that on the Knicks?
It's a good question. I don't think he made the All-Star team in the Hawks, but I could be wrong.
He made the All-Star team once. I can't remember who was on the Hawks or the Knicks.
That's a good question. I should know this if I'm going to put him up on. It was. Oh no, this is going to take me too long. Yeah, but it's taking me too long. It's going to the coach. I don't care about the
coach because he's more known for being a coach than he is for as a player. Like
it's true. Oh well, we'll figure it out later. Apologies to Doc behind us, but thankfully we still got.
He did make it. He made it with Atlanta. Yeah, 1987. Okay. He made it as a 26-year-old, and then he was like 30 by the time he got to the Knicks. So was not an all-star.
There you go. We also got Ben Matlock, my favorite attorney at law.
Nice. Also, I'm sure Doc also loves them because he loves veterans. So we all used to joke that DeAndre Jordan was terrible during the games because he was so old he had to go to bed at 5:30.
Hey, look, man.
I think he's my age. I'm like, he's so old anyway, where I'm also 32. So
I mean, that's where we're at. Like I'm man, you don't tell me I'm 31. Like this is part of the deal now. When we talk about these old dudes and we're like, oh no, like this is, I mean, I don't know if you're a college fan, but when you see some of this stuff and you're like, what year they were not around for 9/11 and you look at it and you're like, crazy. Oh my God.
It's absolutely nuts. Like looking at even like pop stars, like when Olivia Rodrigo got famous, like a year or two ago, whenever that was.
I'll bite. Like, who's Olivia Rodrigo?
Oh, okay. Well, okay. To be fair, I'm
not actually joking. I don't know who that is. Yeah.
Oh no, I know. But what I was going to say was I wouldn't have known who she was either. She actually has some pretty good songs. I actually do. She's a good pop star. But I was a caterer for a year. And I used to go to weddings and they played her all the time. She had this really big song like a year ago called Good For You, which was like, it got criticized because they thought that she ripped off a Paramore song in it, Misery Business. Which, yeah. So check it out. Honestly, her songs, Driver's License, Deja Vu, and Good For You, they're all good songs. But she's like 19, and I remember seeing the year she was born, and I was like, excuse me? What?
It's just weird. And yeah, it's just when we talk about veterans and old players now, it's a different. It hits different.
It does,
dude.
He's older than us, though. He's 34. So
yeah, just
to make us feel better about that. DeAndre Jordan's 34.
Exactly. We talk about him like he's ancient, like 34, and he's only a couple years older than us.
That old tweet, right? You've seen that tweet. The oldest player in the league. Yes. How does he do it? 33 years old. How does he even get out of bed in the morning?
I will say though, there is some real stuff when you hit your 30s for the young folks. I mean, there's the certain parts that your body doesn't work like that anymore. Pickups out the door, like certain things. You're just like, why does my back hurt today?
I was going to say my back's going to hurt literally just from sitting on this couch during this podcast and not sleeping all the way
every
back.
Podcast I do. Yeah, it's now a part of it when they're like,
podcaster back. It's a condition.
It's real though. Podcaster back is a real thing, and you have to I have to conscientiously remember how I'm sitting, and if you do a couple hours of this straight, you're like, oh, my back's screwed for a couple days.
Well, luckily we both look young still, so we got that going for us.
We do. That is true. So is Matisse Bible just going to be on this roster next year? Have they just moved on? Is he just going to sneak into this group where they're like, Thybulle's back?
Um, if I had to guess, he's definitely going to start the year with the team. Would be my guess.
Okay.
Honestly, here's the thing: I've never been a Matisse Thybulle guy. Everyone loves to say now, "Oh, of course you don't love Matisse Thybulle now because of the vaccine," and that. And then I'm like, "No, I've been pounding the table to trade Matisse Thybulle for like a year and a half." Like,
Yeah.
I very much do not like one-dimensional players, and like as amazing as he is defensively, his offense is just, in my opinion, never going to be good enough to stay on the court late in the playoffs. And if you're building a team to win a title, having a guy like him when he's on his rookie contract is fine. But now he's coming up on an extension. Like, he's going to get extended. And I mean, honestly, like, if you had told me 6 months ago, the only reason I think I'd be okay with not trading him, which is an insane thing for me to say, has been like being an anti-Matisse guy for a while, is that I don't think he's going to get paid in the way that he would have pre this playoffs. Like, between the vaccine stuff and him not being able to play, between the fact that he has shown his warts on the offensive end for 2 straight playoffs now, between the fact that like some people think that he might not even just be like that good at all. Like, I don't think he's going to get a bag in the same way that I could have seen a year ago, where a team would give him like maybe even like a Robert Covington type deal, where Covington off his rookie contract got like 4 for 44 or something. Like, I think Thybulle's going to be looking more at like a mid-level exception type deal, where he's making like, I guess that is the mid-level exception now, but like like just above the taxpayer. So like 7, maybe 8 million. And if that's the case, then I'm fine with him sticking around. Like, players that make that much aren't really like, you don't really have to depend on them all that much because they just don't take up that much of the cap. But at the same time, I would like to see, like, I'd prefer for them to trade him, but I always thought that if they were going to trade him, it would be this offseason, because once you can't extend him now, because if you extend him, his contract gets poison pilled, which means that it makes it much harder to trade him. For anyone who doesn't know what poison pilled is, basically the amount of money that you're sending out is like, you can't match contracts on that unless the other team has a trade exception, basically, because it just becomes like, if let's say we gave him a 3 for 30 extension, then he would be $10 million going into his next team, but we'd only be able to accept back like $2 million, which is what he's making right now. It makes it impossible to salary match. So because of that, I thought they would have tried to trade him this offseason. I think they did, but his value's at an all-time low, and they decided whatever offers they got from like the Blazers and the Mavs and these teams that were interested in him, they decided ultimately that what they were getting back was just not good enough to really pull the trigger on that kind of move. So I think if anything, he'll get traded at the deadline as an expiring. Whoever acquires him can still get, like, he's going to be a restricted free agent next year. So like, if you're worried, as long as you're not worried about a team throwing like a huge contract at him, you can bring him back on a pretty decent contract, I'm sure. So if you like Matisse Bible, it's not a bad idea to trade for him. But ultimately, like, the Sixers only have a handful of like matching salaries, like Furkan Korkmaz, George Niang, Thybulle. There's like 4 or 5 guys they could cobble together to get to like a $15 to $17 million player. And if you're making that kind of move, there's only a few guys in the league that would really be worth it to like give up Thybulle and Korkmaz and Niang, who like all can't play in the playoffs, but like our depth is going to be pretty incredible this year. Like, I do think that that's one area where this team is just much better. Like, between House, Melton, like, literally take House, Melton, Tucker, whoever starting or coming off the bench, whatever. Any 3 of those guys would have been our best bench player last year. And then you add in the fact that like you could have development from Paul Reed, who showed really good flashes last year and is a very talented, good young player. And then you're getting to like your 10th guy on the team before you even start to talk about Matisse Thybulle. So the fact that like he will probably play a little bit less, his offensive game won't matter as much. He definitely was fine with Harden in the regular season playing offensively. It was just really in the playoffs. the fact is that like the Sixers now, like guys who were our sixth man, our seventh man last year are going to be like our 12th, 13th men. And now it basically just creates a situation where like guys like Thybulle, like you just don't really have to depend on them that much. And I think that will probably be good for him moving forward. I would be pretty surprised if Matisse Bible a year from now is on the Sixers. So I guess I'll just leave it at that.
Interesting. We'll end on this. What do you think ultimately is, when you look at this roster and where they're at right now and who's going to be in the rotation and where they're going to go this upcoming year, what feels right to you? Do you think an NBA Finals appearance should be the expectation with this group? Or do you think right now they still probably have another move or two to make before they get there totally? Is it dependent on, outside of the obvious two caveats being Harden and Embiid's health, but
Sure.
Tyrese Maxey making one more leap as a player? Like, where are you at with that? What do you think ultimately is fair?
So I'm going to do a podcast eventually, which is going to be like the upside and the downside of this team. So like the upside of this team is like, maybe I'm drinking the Kool-Aid a little bit too much. I think Tyrese Maxey is good enough to be an all-star next year. Like, I think that with his progression from year one to year two, the guys that make those leaps statistically and just from the eye test, how much better he became as a shooter and a creator, those things tend to extend, at least get the guys in the conversation by their third year. So I think we could be sitting here and Tyrese Maxey and James Harden could both be all-stars, or they could both be in the conversation. And Joel, obviously, it's all dependent on his health. So that's like the major swing piece. Harden, can he get back to even like not necessarily Houston Harden, but maybe like first year Nets Harden? That's an important piece of it, because I think you need that version of James Harden to be a legit contender in this Eastern Conference. Plus Maxey taking a step, plus Tobias Harris buying into his role like he did at the end of last season, where his defense was much better. He was a much more willing catch and shoot guy. He was able to kind of make himself more into a role player as opposed to like kind of a fake star, which is what he kind of was before that. And then the other piece there is like, is Daniel House the guy we saw when he played with Harden in Houston? Or is he the guy after Harden left Houston and he was terrible? And, you know, he kind of bounced around the league and just figured out a spot with the Jazz. So, like, the swing pieces are, like, does Tucker age out? You know, how it's basically like those 5 or 6 guys. Like, can they buy into their roles? Can Maxey develop? Can Tucker stay as effective as he was in Miami? And if that's the case, I think that they'll be like a conference finals team, or like at least have a shot at the conference finals, maybe the finals if they get some good injury luck. I still think Boston and Milwaukee are tier 1 in the Eastern Conference. I think that Boston got better by getting Malcolm Brogdon. They could even get even better if they trade Jaylen Brown for Kevin Durant. So that is one of the things where it's like, it's kind of dependent on what happens with the Durant situation. If Durant goes somewhere in the Eastern Conference like Miami or Boston, then I'm going to be concerned, because then I think if Boston gets him, there's one very clear favorite to me. And then if Miami gets him, like they're a tier above us and they probably join that the top 2 and they become part of that top tier. And then the Sixers are kind of the 4th team on the 2nd tier by themselves. So I would view it as like top tier is Boston and Milwaukee, who you just got to respect Milwaukee. They've already won a title. They have the best player in the NBA. They're a little bit thin, which is the one thing I worry about with them. And like their guys are getting up there in age too. So like, how is Brook Lopez going to be? How is Jrue Holiday going to be? I'm wondered with that. And then the 2nd tier I would say is Miami and Philadelphia. I think that if Joel was healthy, the Sixers either could have won that series against Miami or they would have at least pushed it to 7. I mean, if you watch the series, the first 2 games, the Sixers were absolutely terrible without Joel, and they still kept it kind of close throughout. It wasn't really till the end of the series when everyone kind of ran out of gas and it was clear that Joel wasn't healthy that the wheels kind of fell off. I felt like they got themselves back into the series. So I would still say Miami and Philly are in that 2nd tier by themselves. And then there's probably another drop off. And then that 3rd tier has like you guys, Toronto, all those teams. So I feel good about them. I mean, to me, the most realistic outcome is probably another second round exit because they're probably going to run into Boston or Milwaukee in the second round. And if that's the case, unless they get the number 1 seed, if they get the number 1 seed, that's different. And I think they will be a really, really good regular
Which
season
is possible, I think.
I think it's definitely possible. I mean, I think this team is good enough to win 60 games, like depending on health. Like that's how good regular season wise. Like Tobias Harris is a very good regular season player. James Harden is an amazing regular season player. Joel Embiid is an incredible regular season player. Like their best guys are really good in the regular season. So if you told me they won 55 to 60 games, obviously depending on health, I wouldn't be shocked. But ultimately, I do think Milwaukee and Boston kind of have a stranglehold right now on the Eastern Conference's top tier. And in order for the Sixers to jump into that, it either will take like a real revitalization from Harden, Embiid going up yet another level to get even better, or Tyrese Maxey making like a massive leap once again, which like I wouldn't count out any of that, but also there's a lot of variables there.
Interesting. I like it. TrillBroDude, what can the good folks check out from you this week on the podcast front and everything else?
So this week on the pod, I will be having Matt Brooks from Nets Daily on to talk about the Nets situation, which is a absolute shit show. Basically,
hear about this? Did you see this?
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to kind of just run down how we got here. So we're going to look back at the pre-KD Kyrie era and how everything led to what's happening now, which is just absolute craziness. And then otherwise, you can follow on YouTube. I know you're on YouTube now, so we're both on there.
I am on YouTube now. Yeah, we all pivoted to video.
That's right. You know ball with TrillBroDude on there. You can find me on any podcast platform. You know ball, a mostly Sixers podcast. And then once again, follow me on Twitter. We have a TikTok now. I'm an old guy on TikTok, so you can check
Can't
that
do
out.
it. That's my one. I'll never do that. So shout out to you, man. I can't do
I
it.
never did Instagram, so I figured TikTok is
interesting.
Yeah. Never was an Insta. I never had one, so
you're not missing much.
Yeah.
TrillBroDude, this has been great. Thank you so much for making the time as always, and we'll have to reconnect again soon.
Peace, bud.